EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome in, Birds fans. It's a Tuesday edition, May 14th edition of Birds 365. Good day planned, good show planned today. We got Bill Colarulo in hour one, Kaden Steel in hour number two. Not a lot happening in Eagle Land and new news, but they did sign 4 rookies, 3 draft picks, 1 undrafted free agent. They released a tight end. So me and Johnny Mac will talk about that here at the Open. Johnny Mac, good Tuesday to you, sir. How you doing?
Good morning. Yeah, Sean Stevens era has begun.
Yeah, Sean Stevens is in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Eagles do this every year. They have tryout. Obviously, rookie can't be bringing a lot of tryout players. Last year was Charleston Rambo. For people that want to remember him, they generally sign at least one, and this year it's Sean Stevens. It's interesting, I guess, from the perspective that the cornerback room is pretty deep on paper. You got a lot of bodies. He's an older rookie that the Eagles don't tend to like or don't tend to go in that direction. Moved around a lot for different issues. Ended up big playmaker at a lower level, 8 interceptions consecutive years at very small schools, but very good athlete. Strictly a nickel defender. He's very small, so strictly a slot corner.
A lot of slot corners, John, on the roster.
Yeah, well, that's a reaction of what happened last season, to be honest. And you see what, not only Avonte Maddox, but the original plan was for Zach McPherson to move to be his backup, and he got hurt in the preseason. And then Avonte Maddox gets hurt in week 2, and you're off and running to that cluster that they had at that particular position, and we're never able to settle it down. So they seem to be overcorrecting, but that's natural. A lot of bodies, and we'll see. Avonte's the only proven one, so you cross your fingers and hope he's healthy. But at least this time, if the worst comes to fruition again, you have enough bodies to at least have guys who would be comfortable playing the position. And, they had James Bradbury playing there and Eli Ricks, 6'2" corner. I mean, that's a mess waiting to happen. And it ended up to be a mess. Sidney Brown playing out of position. They ran through 8 or 9 slot corners. It was absurd. And one of my criticisms of Sean Desai was that it's like, all right, no doubt it's a bad situation, but pick something and stick with it. Maybe the continuity helps. And Bradley Roby came in as a veteran, got hurt as well, so that affected it. A lot of bad things happened at that position last year.
Yeah, now they have Isaiah Rodgers too. So I think Avonte Maddox is still the leader in the clubhouse, assuming he stays healthy, which is a big if because he has not been able to do that. I want to thank everybody for checking in this morning. Crowley, Twiz, Daz, Joe. We appreciate all of you guys. We got great hits and great reviews yesterday on our defensive breakdown segment on the front 7, and we'll continue that today. We have a part 2. We'll get into coverage on the back end, and we'll talk more about that later on in hour number 1. Coming up, we have Bill Colarulo. So Big Bill, fan favorite Big Bill, will be in just a minute. John, 3 drafted rookies. We talked about Sean Stevens, obviously undrafted, but Jalix Hunt, Anais Smith, and Will Shipley get their deals done. One thing I want to ask you, I saw a tweet from somebody, I can't remember who it was. Sorry for whoever it was. I can't give them credit, but the rookie cap hits for the Eagles are like $2 million. Is there maneuvering that GMs can do on these rookie contracts to lower the cap hits?
No, the rookie deals are all slotted for the most part. When there is a little bit of arguing back and forth with agents, it generally happens in the second round. It generally happens to be the fully guaranteed money, which is now gone deeper into the second round. They want to get it deeper every year, basically, is what they're arguing. There's some questions about offset money. If a guy gets cut, teams don't want them to be able to double dip, get signed by somebody else and still get money from them. And then there's timing of bonuses. A lot of it is deferred, and generally people want it as quickly as possible for obvious reasons. So those are the things that sort of create hurdles, and I use that term very loosely because there are no more rookie holdouts because everything is slotted basically, and it's templated in to the point where I always compare it to an old married couple fighting just for the sake of fighting. They make things up about offset language and timing because they can't argue about substantive stuff, basically, is what it comes down to.
Right. So that's it. And for news in Eagle Land, well, they did release tight end Noah Togiai, Johnny Mac. Are we going to be missing
Noah Togiai? I had to Noah came back so many times I had to learn how to say his last name. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they have a lot of bodies at tight end. Nothing proven other than Dallas Goedert, obviously, and CJ Uzama, who's an older free agent. But he's very capable. I think he'll be the backup in the Jack Stoll role. And they got a bunch of young guys. Alberto hasn't proven anything, but they brought him back, which was a little bit of a surprise. Still waiting for Grant Calcaterra to click as that backup receiving tight end. Then I have EJ Jenkins, who's a futures contract guy. He's been around on practice squads, and McMullen Castles, who's an undrafted free agent. So you know, 7 bodies at tight end becomes 6 bodies, and Noah's been around long enough to where they probably know where his ceiling is, and they think those other young guys, whether it's Grant or McMullen or even EJ Jenkins, have a little bit higher ceiling. But you're probably looking at Dallas Goedert and CJ Uzama as the main tight ends for this year. And that's probably a little bit, even though CJ's 31, that's probably a little bit better than Jack Stoll, if you want to look at it from that perspective. It's obviously short term, but he knows how to play. He's played in big games with Cincinnati. Big time playoff run when they went to the Super Bowl. He had a bunch of catches in that run. He knows how to play, and I think if he's healthy, I think they'll actually get slightly better at backup tight end.
Yeah, I've been waiting for them to get a little bit better. I actually thought there was a chance they drafted a tight end early with Dallas Goedert getting up in age, and he's been hurt a lot. But we'll talk more about this. We'll get into it after Bill. We got Big Bill in the green room waiting, so let's get our friend Bill Colarulo from 97.5 into the mix. Bill, how you doing, man? Good Tuesday to you.
What's going on, boys?
Attaboy. How are you, Bill? I like it. You got the background. You've been at that 97. Now I'm more used to your
yeah, I'm doing background. It from my house today, like where I used to do it.
Yeah, like it.
A little bit later of a start today. I'm on from 2 to 6, so I get to join you guys this morning, which is always fun.
Nice. 2 to 6. So make sure you get a big Bill Colarulo day. Talk to him in the morning, listen to him in the morning, listen to him in the afternoon, 2 to 6. I guess we'll start with the rookie draft picks and the fact that the Eagles signed 3 of them yesterday. When are we going to get to the point where, why isn't Quinyon Mitchell signed? I had to go through this every year with poor Jody. I'm like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. These things are not issues anymore when it comes to the contracts. Now, you got to take calls all the time, Bill. Do people still worry about that?
Not as much since not as much since they put in that rookie wage scale, because it used to be tough. I mean, you remember,
it used to be really difficult.
Sam Bradford, when he was the first overall pick, held out for, I forget what his guaranteed deal was, but it was ridiculous. So,
well, Sam was the last official bonus baby under the old system who got, immense amount of money, as you mentioned. Andrew Brand always jokes that he's got his own wing in the Business Hall of Fame as the last one. But, you used to pay guys like that, Sam Bradford. So this year it would obviously be Caleb Williams. You used to pay those guys more than the best quarterbacks in football as the number 1 overall pick until they they redid that rookie wage scale, which it's kind of a give and take. It's good for the veterans, but it does suck for the younger players a little bit because they're not making the big money until they get to that second contract.
Well, I think you put that with the new NIL deals, and it's a lot of the reason why players are choosing to stay in college a little bit longer, right? I mean, you can make more money with your NIL deals than you can go into the NFL.
Yeah, depending on what program you play at and how good of a player you are, the college guys are making good money. Bill, me and Johnny Mack were talking about the 4 rookies that were signed. Sean Stevens, the undrafted free agent, was in that group. A lot of depth at slot corner. I want to get your take on what you think they're going to, how you think that position will play out, or what your expectations are, or what you're looking for going into camp. A lot of depth on the back end all of a sudden in Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I was just looking at the depth chart. I think there's 14 potential cornerbacks now, and I would assume they're only going to keep 7 of them. So I'm trying to figure out who's going to be the odd man out. I think the easy one is to say, hey, James Bradbury won't be here. But there's going to be some tough decisions. I mean, Isaiah Rodgers is a guy that everybody was so excited about. I'm not sure he even makes the team, John.
Yeah, he's got to have a big summer. Yeah. I think people using the pen with him. I put the pen down, use the pencil. I'm not. Hey, anytime a guy doesn't play in a year, we were talking about Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson was a superstar pre-legal issues. He's got to sit for a little bit over a year, but he's got to sit, still young, hadn't been the same player. I think the assumption that a year off, even for a young guy, isn't going to hurt you, that's probably a bad assumption.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. But as far as the slot corner position goes, I'm assuming Avonte Maddox makes this team. They brought him back on that 1-year deal. I'm thinking that they're hoping he stays healthy. But behind him, does Zach McPherson have a real shot to win that slot corner position? You remember last training camp, he was kind of working in there. We just haven't seen him really outside of special teams on the field because he blew out his Achilles last year.
Yeah, poor Zach's a great guy. It doesn't look good, at least. But, when you get on the field, he's got an opportunity to outplay people. But if you're just looking on paper, as you mentioned, Bill, so many numbers, you only keep a certain amount. You got remember how good special teams players Kaylee Ringo turned out to be, and Josh Jobe. That's a feather in their cap. Zach's going to have a tough time coming back from that injury, unfortunately. I mean, it's so deep. It's hard to find a path to get him on the roster, barring multiple injuries. And they had multiple injuries last year. He was one of them. So I think that's why the Eagles have overcorrected here to a certain degree and have so many bodies, because they don't want to go through what they did last year in the slot, where they rotated so many bodies. It was just a disaster.
If you remember last year, at one point they moved James Bradbury inside to the slot, which I didn't take. I didn't like that. No. Is there any chance that we see him start training camp in the slot corner position to see if he can make this team?
No, I would be stunned. I would be. I mean, to me, that's why they brought in all these bodies. I mean, Avonte's back, and obviously the only thing you have to worry about Avonte Maddox is health. If he's healthy, and that's a big if because he hasn't been. But Tyler Hall is a slot corner. You mentioned Zach McPherson. He's got versatility, but they moved him inside last year. And now you bring in Sean Stevens, who's 5'9", 180, strictly a slot corner. You have Isaiah Rodgers, who has played outside, but if you look at him, it looks like he should be a slot corner. So they have so many guys who can play in the slot.
Not to mention the 2 safeties who can come down. Well, I say 2 safeties because I consider Cooper DeJean a safety, but Chauncey Gardner-Johnson can play the slot. Yeah. We saw Sidney Brown do it a little bit last year too. So it's crazy. You're right. They overcorrected in a big way.
Yeah. And it's better because you don't want to be in a position, and not only Bradbury, but you mentioned Sidney as well. And Eli Ricks, don't forget Eli Ricks. They had a 6'2" guy, Eli, 6'2" guy in James. Sidney Brown, who's a safety, playing out of position. And a lot of people are saying Sidney, before he got hurt, was a little bit of a disappointment because I don't agree with that because he's a third-round pick. I think the expectations were too high, but he's also playing out of position.
Yeah.
Of course he's not going to look great playing out of position.
With the way Sidney Brown plays, you knew he was going to make mistakes as a rookie. He plays with his hair on fire, which is what we love about him. But
he had
when you're going that quick,
interception late in the season too.
Yeah, he looked
that was
athletic on
phenomenal.
that play, didn't he? He looked fast, man.
Really fast.
Yeah, and week 18 he tore his ACL, unfortunately. But as I said, he'll be back early in the season. I think he'll be back week 1. I've seen him. The guy's in tremendous shape. He's very young. He's moving around. He looks like he can play right now. I think I talked about the old school mentality when it comes to rookie contracts. For whatever reason, everybody thinks an ACL is still a 12-month injury. It's not. It's a 9-month injury now. They've made great advancements. So I think Sidney Brown's going to be back. And when you bring the safeties into the equation, Bill, this is a deep room. Unproven, but very, very, very deep with NFL level talent as a whole.
Yeah, I don't think when I look at that defense, I'm not putting the secondary as my main concern. I have more concerns about linebacker, same as last year, and then you even have the edge rusher now. I would have loved to have seen them keep Hassan Reddick because I think now at edge rusher, potential to be very good. Definitely the potential's there if Nolan Smith takes that leap this year, if Bryce Huff becomes more of an every down player. But there's just no guarantee now on the edge like you had with an Hassan Reddick who's double-digit sacks every single season.
Bill, we talked to you last week right before the coordinator spoke. I just wanted to give you a chance and get your opinion on what you heard specifically from Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore. I thought it was pretty good. I said to Johnny Mack, the adults are back in the room. The maturity level is there, and you can clearly see there's two guys that have been around the game. They have experience in the game. So from that perspective, I like it. What did you hear from the coordinators, and what did you like or not like about it?
I think you're spot on. Both of those guys sounded like they could be head coaches with the way they address the media. And I don't want to put too much stock just in a press conference because if we did that, Nick Sirianni would have been fired the first day he was here.
Yeah, right.
But I thought they did a great job. Vic Fangio, clearly a veteran who's been around a long time. And what I loved was his answer when they said, what's the most important part of your defense? He said, good players. You got to have good players. I don't care how good of a coach you are. And I also liked when he talked about when things start to go south, getting back to basics. And I thought that was important because last season, I think some of the things we heard were people on that defense were confused. They didn't know where to be. There was a lack of communication a lot of times on that defense. So if you're struggling just to get back to basics and keep it simple, because you go back to that San Francisco 49ers game, and I'm sure you remember because we were all there post-game when Seth Joyner was just talking about how it looked like nobody wanted to tackle on that defense. It didn't matter how you schemed things up in that 49ers game. People looked like they didn't want to bring guys to the ground. Deebo Samuel, who was talking trash all offseason, came in here and backed it up, and nobody wanted to punch him in the mouth. So that's what I liked hearing Vic Fangio basically saying, listen, when things aren't going well, we're going to get back to basics because you need to be able to play at 100% speed, not questioning where you're supposed to be on the field. And then talking about Kellen Moore, I loved what Kellen Moore had to say. First of all, with Jalen Hurts, talking about how his legs is something that is an advantage to them that they're going to utilize because that is spot on. The thing that makes Jalen Hurts so damn good, and we talked about it last week, is his running ability, getting back to that RPO. We talked about that. He also talked about Saquon Barkley and how he's excited for him as a running back to see him run the football, but then also said to take advantage of the other things he does well, which is not only pass protect, but catch the ball out of the backfield, something that the Eagles didn't like to do last year, whether it was Jalen Hurts or Brian Johnson getting the ball to their running backs in the passing game. So I loved all of those things. And obviously he talked about pre-snap motion, which a lot of people are wondering why we didn't have that last season. So
Johnny Mack asked that question. Yeah.
Johnny Mack always asks the good questions. I always hear it. I always hear it. I'm out. There's Johnny Mack. But yeah, I just thought that as far as press conferences go, I thought both of them did a great job. And Michael Clay didn't get a lot of play because we all have heard from him before, but I liked what he had to say too about the return game being a real advantage now. Like, you could take advantage of the new return rules to make that a part of your game plan with your returners. So all in all three coordinators impressed me when they spoke.
Yeah, Michael's coming off a great season. Obviously, the one thing, there was such an improvement on special teams, so I think there's less of it. Last year was the exact opposite. People were asking, why the hell is Michael Clay back?
I couldn't believe it, John.
Yeah,
I will admit I was dead wrong. I was furious when they brought him back because the 2022 season, their only weakness that year was their special teams unit.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then it came back to haunt them in the biggest game. And I'm thinking, why'd they bring this guy back? But special teams was great last year.
Yeah, it really was. And that was the one, I remember I was concerned in training camp because they kept getting rid of their good special teams players. And one fan said, and I give him credit, and I wish I remembered who it was. He said, well, those guys weren't that good anyway. And he turned out to be right. And they let Ringo out there and Josh Jobe and those guys, and they turned into great coverage players. Britton Covey in his second year, phenomenal season as a punt returner. And then, getting a punter helped as well. Braden Mann, after Aaron Cepas continued to go in a negative direction. Braden Mann was great, and Jake Elliott. I mean, that guy's just money.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's not many questions when it comes to Michael Clay's units. I was interested with the kickoff return, though, because I heard this a couple times down there. They're kind of in a wait and see mode. And I'm like, these special teams coordinators, they're like, what do you mean? This is your job. You don't wait and see. You gotta get ahead of you gotta be proactive and say, all right, I'm going to study a bunch of XFL film and I think I can do this. And maybe they are. They probably
I would think they are.
Yeah. But I think, unfortunately, Bill, because they had to water down the rule to get it through. And instead of bringing it out to the 40-yard line, they're only going to bring it out to the 30 with the touchback, which is a little bit more of a penalty, but not much. And I think ultimately we're going to be back to everybody's just kicking it out of the end zone, and it's going to suck.
Yeah, because if you have a weapon back there that can break a long kickoff return every time, the opposing team's going to say, we'll just take our chances putting you at the 30.
Yeah.
So, that's why it would have been better probably to say the 40. But like you said, they may not have gotten it through when they voted on it.
Yeah. So that's kind of disappointing. I don't think much is going to change. I really don't. I think you're going to see a few kickoff returns. And if somebody does have a Cordero Patterson in his prime, they're going to go, all right, I'll just take the ball to 30. I'm not going to kick it to him.
Now, I don't know if I saw this in the rule or not. Is it automatically a touchback if it goes into the end zone, or can a player return it?
You can return it, but if it goes out of the end zone,
they could just kick. These guys they have such big legs now; they could just kick it through.
Yeah, that's my point. They're not gonna. There's the landing zone. There's all these tweaks, and it looks good on paper. But if there's no penalty to force you to kick it into the landing zone, and the penalty is 5 yards from what it was previously.
Yeah, they'll just take their chances at the 30.
I think that's what's going to happen. I hope I'm wrong, because I'd love to see the play back in the game, and I like the way the XFL did it. But there's got to be an incentive for the kicking team to kick it in. And to me, that 30 is not nearly as bad as the 40. Although Chip Kelly, I bring up Patterson, he lost the game because under the old kickoff rules, he wouldn't kick it to Patterson and just kept giving the ball at the 40-yard line, and they lost the game because of it. So you never know, but I do think that's not going to be as exciting as people hope, unfortunately, and I hope I'm wrong.
But even that 5 yard difference, I think the NFL looks at it as being worth it. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I saw that last year there was a decline in points scored. And I saw some analytic that with the increase of 5 yards in field position, the NFL is predicting it's going to result in X amount of additional points per game. I mean, they're doing everything to try to create more offense.
Well,
I think partially the hip drop tackle, even though that was a injury concern. It seems to me that the NFL only puts safety rules in place when it results in more offense. Like they don't worry about
and also money, because people like scoring, so it creates interest. And look, evident, they're playing Wednesday on Christmas Day this year. They don't give a crap about player safety. Thursday, short weeks. They don't give a crap.
Short weeks. There's research that shows artificial turf isn't as safe as grass. They haven't passed that rule. But the ones, got to get rid of that hip drop tackle.
And interesting, when the soccer stuff is coming here, they're replacing all the fields because they're not going to play. They couldn't have got it if on artificial turf. They won't accept that. But the NFL, which makes more money than God, we can't change over. You got me on a rant, Bill. What an absurd league they are.
Yeah,
player safety. You know what's going to be crazy this year, John?
Yeah.
That players are able to wear those, I forget what they call them, the protective gear on their helmets. They can choose to wear them in games.
I know. Oh, that's
I don't know if anybody's going to actually do that. That's going to look goofy out.
That's going to look really strange.
Yeah, they're going to get ripped to high heaven. But when that came out, I had to go through and look for my Kelsey bubble wrap picture.
Yeah.
When he came out with the bubble wrap on top of
but that's going to
Guardian cap.
Yeah, the Guardian caps. I saw that. I was reading that what they're going to try to do, though, if a player chooses to wear it in the game, they're going to put logos on it or something to try to make it less. It's just
they're going to build in like a Guardian cap type of helmet.
Yeah, it's going to look very weird, but yeah, they're all about player safety unless it means less money to them, because you can't out of one side of your mouth say, hey, we're going to ban the hip drop tackle for player safety, but then, like you said, play games on Wednesdays, play games on Thursdays, extend the season to 18 games, which is what now Roger Goodell is saying, which we all knew was going to come. But my concern with that, and I keep saying this, I've been saying this for a while, I knew they were going to go to an 18-game season eventually, but they better stop there, because what makes the NFL so damn good in comparison to all the other major sports is that every game matters. Yeah. 1 week, we're winning the Super Bowl. The next week, we want our head coach fired. In the other sports, you don't get that. People check out until the playoffs. Look at
Johnny
basketball.
Mack had a great comparison on this yesterday. He compared it to baseball. 2 losses in
that was big. I got it from
games.
Vic. That was what Vic did.
Yeah.
Back when it was just because Vic's a big baseball guy, a big Phillies fan. He brought that up. He was like, back when they played 16, now they play 17. He said they play 162. So if you think about it from that standpoint, you lose 2 in a row. That's like losing 20 in a row in baseball. It's a big freaking deal.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you went down that route, because the schedule's coming out tomorrow, Bill, officially. We already know week 1, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Eagles, Packers. And they're all meaningful. I brought this up all week. You don't want to play the Packers there.
No.
That's because it's an Eagles home game. So that's a game that would have been at Lincoln Financial Field against an opponent that's probably going to be in the playoff picture with you, and you're fighting for seeding. And now all of a sudden you got to give up a home game. No guarantee, but it would be easier than a neutral field game. If they lose that game, Bill, I think it's a big deal. But
that was the opponent when I looked at all the potential opponents for that game, because you knew they weren't going to put an NFC East opponent there. You knew it couldn't be teams who were already playing internationally there. The Packers were probably the worst opponent for the Eagles to have to open up in Brazil against. Not only, John, because of what you're saying, where this game may come down to determine seeding when the playoffs hit, this team needs a hot start. I mean, if they go to Brazil and they lose with the way last season ended, the chatter is going to be so loud about, hey, they should have fired Sirianni, and is Jalen Hurts the answer? And I've been saying this, and this sparked a couple of phone calls on the radio, but I was saying that I think we need to be patient as a fan base when this season starts, because as excited as I am about Kellen Moore, this is a new offense that they're going to be learning. So let's preach a little bit of patience here. Jalen Hurts is learning another offense for the, what? How many years in a row now has he had? He only had back-to-back
only
coordinators.
had Shane, and that wasn't even back-to-back because he only had Shane for a half season. So he got him, but not 2 full seasons.
So I don't.
And ironically, that second season was his best year.
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah.
So I mean, I did like to hear. We go back to Kellen Moore. I am maybe in the minority here. I like that they're going to build off of what's already here. I know there's a lot of fans who are saying keep Sirianni as far away from the offense as possible. I disagree with that. I think you look at Sirianni's career so far as the head coach, and under his watch, where he's been involved in this offense, they've had a lot of success. You had Jalen Hurts as an MVP candidate. You have A.J. Brown literally breaking franchise records. And we're saying, oh, yeah, get them completely away from the offense. They've done a lot of things well. I get the frustration with the way the season ended. But to act as if this offense hasn't done anything well and to get Sirianni as far away as possible, to me, that's an overreaction.
Yeah, Johnny Mack and I talked a lot about this with Kellen Moore and Nick Sirianni. You seem to like the idea of the meshing of the offensive minds. I was with you at first, and the more I've been thinking about it, I heard Johnny Mack say that, the potential problems he sees with it. I think I'd like Nick to maybe get the heck out of there and just be the CEO coach. Let Kellen run his offense. He's a great offensive coordinator. If you trust in him as an offensive coordinator, he will do the things that worked in Philly, regardless of whether Nick's given the input or not.
Now that I agree with. I think it should be a natural evolution. In other words, Bill, I don't think you should hammer the square peg in the round hole and say, all right, we did this well under Nick. This has to be in this offense. I think if Kellen's as good as people think he is, that's going to happen anyway. Let him do his job if you brought him in. And I don't even agree with that because I don't think it should have been taken away from Nick. But once you did, then you got to let the guy do his job. And you got to let him figure it out on his own. You can't say, oh, you come in and run the offense, Kellen, but you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do that. I don't like that.
See, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I don't think that Nick Sirianni should say to Kellen Moore, you have to do X, Y, and Z. I just think that it would be criminal to say, I'm not going to give you any input at all. I've been here for 3 years. I've worked with Jalen Hurts for 3 seasons. I've worked with A.J. Brown for 2 seasons. I've worked with a lot of these guys on the offense all 3 years. We finished in the top 10 2 years in a row with me involved in the offense. We did all of these things well. This is what Jalen is really good at. This is what A.J. really likes. These are the routes that seem to have really worked. These are the pass protections and the run blocking schemes that seem to really work. Why would you not lean on that type of information of a guy who's been here for 3 seasons? My concern is that there are people saying, get him completely removed from the offense. And to me, it's, why wouldn't you lean on that type of information? Why would,
I think it's
the
only
more information you have, the
sense.
better.
Yeah,
information is fine.
To use the guy that's been here for 3 years and has seen the ups and the downs. Obviously, he's going to have some good input, but I do think Kellen should have autonomy to be able to.
I agree with that.
Be able to call what he wants to call, to be able to, go to a situation the way he sees fit. But we'll see. I mean, I think Nick might be feeling like he's getting undercut. And part of me wonders if
that's the problem.
The human element of that is going to come through where, I was hired as the play caller first. I'm the offensive-minded head coach. I don't want to give it all up.
The problem I see is if this offense has success this year, everyone's going to say, see, it's just because of Kellen Moore. Sirianni had nothing to do with it. But I've had some conversations with some people at the Fanatic who are thinking, if Kellen Moore has a good season as offensive coordinator, he obviously becomes a head coaching candidate. But they're saying, well, we think that the Eagles would make the decision to keep Kellen Moore and get rid of Sirianni. And
No.
I don't see how you could do that, because if Kellen Moore has a good season, the Eagles have a good season.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you really say, hey, the Eagles had a good year, we're going to move on from our head coach?
I don't think
Yeah.
they would do that, but I do think it makes sense if you think the Eagles are regretting the way they let Steichen leave the building. You saw how the offense changed when he left. If Kellen can create success, I could see why someone would say they'll want to keep that guy in the building, keep the offense,
I don't think anybody in that building is thinking about letting Shane Steichen out of the building. And that's not an insult to Shane. That's like, I think that's a fan base thing. Like, oh, he did a great job. He's
right.
They made it to the Super Bowl with the head coach. They're not thinking about returning. BLG, our buddy Brandon Lee Gouton, has the best philosophy on this. If you're really good, you're going to lose coaches. So just accept it. Don't worry about it. That's the way it works.
Well, from the same mindset though, Johnny Mac, can't you approach it with, okay, we're going to lose coaches if we're good no matter what. Let's get the guy that runs our offense to be the head guy, because then we're not going to lose him.
Completely.
It's more like the Andy Reid approach, where Andy's the offense. He brings in a good offensive mind. They lose Eric Bieniemy. They bring in a new guy. Offense still looks great. From that approach, I could see where they might think with that line of logic.
Here's what's bothered me, and you guys may disagree because you both are saying you don't want Kellen Moore to try to blend with Nick Sirianni's offense. What bothers me is that we look at 2022 and we say as a fan base, the only reason the offense was so successful was because of Shane Steichen, and Nick Sirianni had nothing to do with it. And then we look at last year and the struggles, and it's Nick Sirianni's the reason the offense struggled. Well, if you're not going to give him any credit for what happened in 2022, why are you giving him all the blame for what happened in 2023? To me, I think Sirianni's fingerprints are on both. I'm not absolving him for what happened last season, but I just don't think we can say he had nothing to do with a team that was one of the best teams we've seen. If they finish that half of football against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, the 2022 Eagles go down as maybe the best Philadelphia Eagles team we've ever seen. That would have been an historic season if they finished.
I say it all the time. That's the best Eagles team. The best team doesn't always win.
Yeah.
The best Patriots team didn't win. They were 16-0. They didn't win a Super Bowl. That's still the best Patriots team. I'm sorry, they are. Similar, I say it all the time, and most people around the team with me agree with me. That's the best Eagles team I've ever covered. Now, I'm not going back to Ray Giddy will go back to 49 and 50.
You're not that old, John?
I'm almost, but I'm not going back to 49 and 50. I think it's the best Eagles team of the modern era. And I covered the Super Bowl team. They're much better than the Super Bowl winning team.
I would go as far as to say if they had one more drive, one more couple minutes on the clock to get that ball back, they could have won that Super Bowl.
I just wish they had the chance. If that holding call doesn't get called, we at least get to see them with the ball back with some time on the clock.
I don't understand why a lot of people, not everybody, but they can't wrap their heads around that. It takes a lot of things to win. It could be a crappy call, a 50-50 call, because James had no problem with that. James is accountable. He said, I held. They called it. I wish they didn't. But it's a 50-50 call, and they might not call it, and all of a sudden it's a different outcome. That's how razor thin the margin is. So I know you got to run, Bill. So we'll wrap it up. I do want to talk about the motion real quick, but we'll get into that. 2 to 6 this afternoon. Bill Colarulo.
I got to say, John, I got to tell you. So I was down at the Dover Raceway. We were doing a show from
cool. Yeah,
we were doing a show from there, but I had to get picked up by the head of their marketing or whatever it was in a golf cart. And I get in and I go to shake his hand. I said, how you doing? I'm Bill Colarulo. He goes, I know who you are. I'm an avid Birds 365 listener, and I see you on that show.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, good to hear, man. He goes, oh, I love John McMullen. Love John McMullen. He goes, I look forward to hearing him every single day. So he may be listening right now. So we'll give him a shout out.
Good shout out to for him down at Dover. That's good stuff right there, Bill. That's good Birds 365 love out there.
Yes, sir. Well, I got to run. I got to go take my daughter to school, but I appreciate you guys having me. Hopefully, I'll see you next week.
All right,
Thanks, Bill.
I'll see you, man.
See you guys.
See ya.
There's Big Bill Colarulo on from 97.5 The Fanatic later today, 2 to 6. Doing great job over there. We miss having Bill here on JAKIB Sports, but he always does great work. Always great to get him up here. Johnny Mac, we'll get to a timeout, our first time out of the show, and we'll come back and we'll go part two of the defensive breakdown. We'll get into coverages in the back end. So put back on that football cap, that Vic Fangio cap, and get ready to explain some defense to me and to the listeners of Birds 365. I want to thank everybody. Speaking of our listeners, I want to thank all of them for being in here. SMD Eagles, Rolando, Twiz, Robert, Slagger, Crawley. We appreciate you guys. Make sure you drop a like on the show. Let's get over 100 likes today during the live show. Over 100 likes. Can we do it? If you guys like Birds 365, be sure to drop a like. Let's get to a commercial break. And on the other side, we'll go part two of the defensive breakdown.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Field of life, First Trust Bank is there for you.
Champions on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Because Philadelphia dreams deserve a Philadelphia bank.
Heading down the shore. Have a ball once more.
Here, imaginations run wild and time stands still. Because here, you can find the best of the Jersey Shore, all on one 5-mile island. So leave the old you behind and get lost in the woods.
Wild, wild, wildwood day.
Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Hi, I'm Jim Muehlbronner, Managing Partner at Del Val Insurance Group. Give us a call. We're a local, knowledgeable agency, not an 800 number. Go Birds!
The greatest fans on earth. It's a bold statement, but would you expect anything less from Philadelphia? 58 years of heartache creates a toughness, a grit, a resolve not found in most. Sure, our prayers were answered, but now that we've had a taste, we're looking for more. Pondley Hockey, official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles. EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome back in, everybody, to Birds 365. We're going to go into our part two of the defensive breakdown today. Over 8,000 views and counting on Johnny Mac's part one masterclass of the Vic Fangio defense. No, it is not a 3-4 defense. Johnny Mac explained that yesterday. So if you missed that segment, make sure you go back and watch it on the JAKIB YouTube channel, John McMullen's masterclass. Over 8,000 views, so good stuff, and we'll get into part two now. Johnny Mac, let's get into it. Part two. We're going to go back end now. What's the role of the safeties and the cornerbacks in this?
Oh, boy, man. We need a 15-hour show for this. I'll try to, and this is the most complicated part of the defense, and it is complicated from the perspective of so many things being asked. Now, coverage is coverage, as all corners and safeties will tell you. So they're used to the different versions, but to use so many in one sort of philosophy is kind of rare. So basically, where I would start is, he almost always starts with a split safety look, and then he spins off into whatever coverage he's going to call. And when you do split the field, you're basically talking about two basic coverages, and that's cover 2 and cover 4, which I think most people are familiar with cover 2, which is pretty simple. And then quarters coverage is a little bit more difficult, which is, coaches can do it in a different way. So when we talk about coaches copying Vic Fangio, and he said people take some little pieces, not everybody does everything the same way. What he's talking about is you can have a pure zone guy. So that might be you drop to a spot, for instance, and that's it, which is probably the simplest way. You got zone match principles, which is underneath defenders have to pass off the routes as they go into specific zones. And then you have man match principles, which will look like man coverage at times, but really isn't. And once the zone match is completed, basically it becomes man to man. So it's very complicated. And then from Vic's evolution himself, he really plays more cover 3 than he has in the past, which is a good indication from, he's realized that you have to switch things up. You have to evolve. I think evolution is the key to everything, because if people get used to it, it becomes easier to deal with. And by people, I mean quarterbacks, especially veteran quarterbacks. And I think you've seen that with some of the Fangio defenses. Ed Donatel, particularly, is one of his best friends, has really struggled because people knew what he was doing. And it was too easy for quarterbacks. So he's evolved, and he plays more cover 3, which is basically where that flat defender comes in, or hook defender, whatever you like, whatever you want to call it. And basically that's to get sort of in the way and make things a little bit more difficult. And he toggles back and forth through all this stuff, and week to week it'll be different. And that's why we talk about 3-4 defense, which I don't like that term, as Zander said, but they play odd man fronts. But that's not a good description of what they do, because they'll simply toggle to a 4-man front on the next play, potentially. As Vic said, it's a very versatile defense. And when he also talked about, as we got in with Bill, about going back to basics, if you struggle, that's what he's talking about. Because if your head is spinning, you can imagine the young players.
Right.
And occasionally you want to simplify it. But basically, right now, so if he's rushing 5 and dropping 6, which he doesn't often do, his blitz percentages are low 20% at best. There's a little bit more, he calls it fire zone 3. And then if he rushes 4 and drops 7, which is more typical.
Right.
You have a lot of 2x2 formations. That's where he adds the hook defender, the extra hook defender, to try to deal with that underneath. And last year he had a lot of success with Andrew Van Ginkel, and that's what we were all trying to bring up. I was trying to bring up with Zach Bond, because Howie mentioned him as a similar sort of upside to an Andrew Van Ginkel player. And I said, well, that's interesting, because he had a lot of success with that type of defender. Now, maybe he changes because he doesn't have that defender here. And I've talked about big nickel and using an extra safety. He'll do different stuff, and he's got the cachet to do it. Whereas, if you're Sean Desai, you're trying to do the same things, but you're going to get questioned. He's not going to get questioned. And yeah, so that's just a basic, and then it expands from there. The coverages, and what he does, and it's the most complicated defense in the NFL. And when you get it and you play with freedom, it can be really, really impressive and really stifling. And when you don't get it, and I bring up Ed Donatel, it can be really ugly. So a lot of it is teaching and making sure the players understand their roles and responsibilities, and the communication that we talked about yesterday on the back end is not only important in this defense, it's an absolute necessity in this defense.
How much correlation is there to what they would run on the back end in coverage, cover 3 quarters, cover 2, versus what
And
they
by
do?
the way, he calls his cover 3 cover 9. So, again, it's just labeling. But he does sort of what those match principles, and when he's got an extra rusher, and the hook defender when he's dropping 7, which he prefers to do. So yeah, I mean, so even the terminology, like other people might call it cover 3, he calls it cover 9. And this is from people that know, believe me. This is from other coaches and guys who do this for a living. And the terminology is something that can be an issue as well. Because if you talk to any corner, they'll tell you coverage is coverage. But then when you start calling cover 3 cover 9, or going in a different direction, that could be an impact. But that's the kind of stuff that should be cleared up in training camp.
Well, let's talk scenarios. 1st and 10, what's their base package here? Or their base coverage, I guess you could say.
His base coverage is probably that fire zone coverage, which is, basically a match zone where you pass off in your role. That's what you're going to see the most. So when I said drop, there's probably, as I said, three different types of zone coverages in the NFL. Pure zone would be that, okay, you drop to a spot, you drop to the 40-yard line. That's the simplest. Zone match, which is what he uses most of the time, is that you'll see the underneath defenders passing off depending and what the coverage is. And then the man match, which he also uses a lot, and that will come off sometimes as man coverage, but it really isn't. That's basically, if you're the last guy, then it becomes man to man. So that's where communication comes into it and is very important, because if you think somebody else is responsible,
right,
and all of a sudden you drop a guy when you're not supposed to drop a guy, it can look really, really ugly.
Yeah, and we mentioned that yesterday. I mean, the Super Bowl, the Eagles got burned twice from a lack of communication on the defensive end.
Yeah. So it's not easy. Probably the easiest thing to do from a defensive perspective was to get a bunch of athletes and point at those guys and say, you got this guy, you got this guy, but nobody's got 7 coverage players that can match up like that. So that's where all the zone, and the Eagles have made, there isn't a lot of man-to-man in the modern NFL. There really isn't.
No, and there's certainly not a lot in this defense.
No. So I think people get caught up in sometimes it'll look like press coverage, and sometimes it'll look like man coverage, but it really isn't. And basically, and this is what they like about Quinyon Mitchell, He's got a lot of experience in this type of defense where it's basically man principles but zone coverage, and they think he's going to be a big time playmaker in that type of system, and we'll see how it works. But yeah, it's I wouldn't do it with young players, but
And they've went all young. This is why, as I listen to you explain this, and I understand, I'm obviously not as entrenched in learning and understanding the game of football and packages and coverages and all those things like the guys that have been drafted and signed to this team are. But boy, I mean, we're talking about getting rid of James Bradbury. He's
Well,
not
that's
that
why
bad of his own corner. Maybe he's worth keeping just for the sake of communication to keep these young guys in the right spots, to know how to explain it. You need people out there that know what to do. And I'm not saying the young guys don't, but it does sound like there's got to be an acclimation period for those guys.
Well, and there's going to be hiccups and mistakes and things like that. But when
you pointed out, it looks ugly if
Yeah.
they make me, yeah.
I pointed out weeks ago before the draft that I was almost hoping they didn't draft a corner because I thought Bradbury would have a bounce back year in big system because he's a pure zone cover. He's going to get it. He knows, he's seen it all. He's played it all. And I still think he'd have a bounce back season. I just don't think the opportunity is there any longer because there's no room for him now. And long term, don't get me wrong, it'll be better to have the young players, but maybe, Bill was talking about patience. It's not the easiest thing for fans to have patience, but it's probably a good idea to have some patience with these young defensive backs, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean specifically. They're going to make some mistakes. Don't expect, there's going to be some blown coverages and things like that. And I don't know if they have that hook defender, flat defender yet. I don't think they do. I don't see an Andrew Van Ginkel on this roster. Now that Bick has said,
When you say flat defender, you're talking Van Ginkel, who's like a hybrid between potentially a slot corner and a linebacker, you could say?
No, he's a hybrid between an edge rusher and he's got coverage skills, which is very rare. It's not easy to find that player.
Which Jalex Hunt fits the mold of that.
Potentially down the road.
Yeah, down the road. I'm not saying right now, but I'm saying, they did.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen Bryce Huff hasn't been asked to do it. Maybe he can do it. Andrew Van Ginkel wasn't asked to do it before last season, and he did it. So, on paper, and that's why if you go back to when Howie brought up Zach Bond, and that was one of the more interesting things at the press conference because Howie was talking and specifically brought up, he didn't say by name because he didn't want to talk about somebody else's player, but you knew who he was talking about. He was talking about Van Ginkel in Miami, and he thought Zach Bond had some similar traits to develop into that kind of player. And all of a sudden, Vic shows up and he's talking about him as a stack linebacker, as an off-ball linebacker, completely different roles. So I don't see that player. And Vic's smart enough to know he's not gonna use stuff that he used if he doesn't have the players to pull it off. So if you go back to 2021, Nick's first season, they were running this scheme, but they didn't run as much 5-man fronts, as much 50 fronts, those tight fronts that we were talking about yesterday, and those tough fronts that they wanted to because they didn't have a nose tackle, a big-time nose tackle. If you remember, Javon Hargrave would at times play that role, but he wasn't good at it.
Yeah, not at all.
And
he was more of a pass rushing defensive tackle. Yeah.
And Jannard Avery was the Sam linebacker, and he ain't Hassan Reddick. So they didn't use it as much as they wanted to. And then when they got those players, Jordan Davis and Hassan Reddick, it really took off from a schematic standpoint in year 2. So I think I think Vic is smart enough to know if he doesn't have something else until he gets that piece. But yeah, the my biggest concern is definitely the communication on the back end with all the young players. And you've already seen it with veteran players. I mean, Slay and Bradbury aren't, it doesn't get more veteran than that.
Yeah, and they're the guys that got burnt in the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Marcus Epps at the time was very high football IQ. CJ's very high football IQ, very good coverage player. And even they, had hiccups. So everybody's going to have hiccups at times. But the longer you play it, the more comfortable you get into it, the better you get, because he'll keep expanding it and he'll keep rolling out different coverages to try to confuse the quarterback. And, then it's, as JG would always say, rush and cover, cover and rush. It also comes into the front has to get home as well. And that makes things a heck of a lot easier.
John, when I think of defense, to me, the most important part of defense is getting pressure on the quarterback, impacting the quarterback's ability to get the ball out effectively and on time. What's the most important position or player or in Vic Fangio's system? Is it the front?
Yeah. If you look at Khalil Mack, even Akeem Hicks, those guys dominated up front, and everybody looks good. So to me, on this team, it's Jalen Carter. Jalen Carter has the talent to be the best defensive tackle in football. If he gets there, he gets there. If he doesn't, maybe he doesn't. But
well, let me ask you, is Vic Fangio the right coordinator to extract that talent from him? Is this system the right one? We talked about the different fronts they could be in. We talked about the 5-man front, the 4-man front, the tight front, the tough front. Is that the best system to get the most value out of those players, him and Jordan Davis?
Well, it depends what you define as value. I've been talking about Jordan Davis from day one. Jordan Davis is so important to this defense and has been, and people think he's not good. And when he's not out there, it's an issue because they can't replicate what he does. But he doesn't get a lot of sacks. He's not designed to get a lot of sacks.
He's not designed to get a lot of stats, period.
Yeah. So, it depends. Same thing with Jalen Carter. Could he go somewhere else and get a bunch of sacks and be a double-digit sack guy? Yes. Is he going to get less in this defense? Yes. Can he be impactful? Yes. Akeem Hicks, I think, was for a few years, life moves so fast in the NFL. He was probably the most underrated player in football. He would just blow up plays on a consistent basis. He was impossible to block. But, it wasn't designed to put up big sack numbers or things like that. And Jalen will get sacks because he's so talented, but he's not going to be Aaron Donald. And he could go to a defense. Nobody's Aaron Donald. That's unfair. But if he were in the old school Jim Schwartz defense, people would think he's better. Doesn't necessarily mean he's better, if that makes sense. He could still be as impactful in this scheme. But people like stats, and for stat people, yeah, maybe the perception will be. But to me, it's not about perception. It's about impact on the game. And he'll have a very good opportunity to have a huge impact on the game.
I want to get back to the backs and the coverages, but I want to ask this question on Jalen Carter. You just said he has the potential to be one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. How do you make him that? That's what I define as value. I want, if you say Johnny Mack, and I think this is not just Johnny Mack, this is many people believe, he has the potential to be one of the most talented DTs in the NFL. Well, how do I get him? How do I get that out of him? Because to me, if I get that out of him, the rest of my defense will be better because of it.
Well, I think he already was last year. I mean, he was.
So this is the right system to do that?
Well, again, yeah, he's sort of going to be good no matter. And that's what Vic said. He's going to be good no matter what. When I bring up Kelsey talking about he played with two players, and I think he undersold it. I think he could have put Lane in there. I think he could have put AJ. But he said he played with two players that would have been successful regardless of scheme, philosophy, supporting cast. And he said Jason Peters and Fletcher Cox. Jalen's a similar guy. He's going to be successful wherever you put him. And that's exactly what Big said. He already, if you go to the PFA, it was Dexter Lawrence, Aaron Donald, Quinnen Williams, Derek Brown, Chris Jones, Jalen Carter. He was the sixth best defensive tackle last year as a rookie. Now, what you want, Dexter Lawrence had some injuries, so I'll throw him out. Aaron Donald played 916 snaps. Quinnen Williams played 778. Derek Brown played 938. Chris Jones played 947. Jalen played 599. So you want him to be up in that 900 range. And that has to do with more of conditioning and playing at Georgia and rotating and not being used to it. So they have to get that 599 up to 900 and have the same impact. He was already, when he was on the field last year, he was already one of the best defensive tackles in football. He's got to get more disciplined as well. And Vic will help him with that. But I mean, just flat out talent. He's unbelievable. He's different.
One last question on Jalen Carter before we go back. I want to talk about Quinyon Mitchell and how he fits in this. How much do you put on the coordinator change in Jalen's drop off? Because at 10 games into the season last year, Jalen Carter was far and away by a country mile the defensive rookie of the year. The last 6 games or the last 7 games, he slips all the way down and he loses the defensive rookie of the year. And I'm not saying that's the end all be all. I'm just saying his production and his perceived value and his tangible value significantly decreased. Do you put that on the change in defensive coordinator or just a conditioning thing where he's getting acclimated to the NFL?
Probably a little bit of both. Certainly.
What's more though? Come on, I'm going to make you make a decision. What's more? Did they start using him wrong?
Conditioning. I think he hit the rookie wall. Conditioning, but the lack of discipline, because it was the entire front. And I know the Eagles were upset by this. Those guys were going off freelancing. Now, if that had something to do with the change, they sort of started playing for themselves. And it's not only Hassan Reddick trying to kick him out the door, because it was everybody. It was Josh Sweat who talked about it. It was Jalen Carter. It was everybody. And they weren't disciplined. And I could tell you, if Jim Schwartz was here, he would have pulled his hair out, because he just is hyper focused on when it comes to the pass rush. You can't freelance. You gotta be disciplined. Otherwise, you're going to be giving up big plays. And even in the run game, guys getting out of gaps, doing what they're not supposed to do. It was a big problem. And if that had something to do with the move from Sean Desai to Matt Patricia, potentially. But I think most of it would have to do with that's a process. The rookie wall is real. It's not just Jalen Carter. You've seen it everywhere. These guys, there's certain guys. I mean, Aaron, again, it's tough to compare anyone to Aaron Donald, but is in phenomenal shape, was in phenomenal shape day one his NFL career, played 900 snaps every year. But those guys are the outliers. And especially, he played at Pitt where he was the star and he had to play a lot.
Right. Jalen Carter was on the best defense in college
Yeah,
football.
exactly.
One of the best defenses in college
The
football.
Georgia
history.
problem is real. As
Yeah.
Nick Sirianni would say, it's a nice problem to have, but they have so many good players and they have to play them, or if they don't play them, they're going to lose them in the transfer portal. They got to keep everybody happy, and guys don't play a lot. And if you're not used to playing a lot, you don't just show up at the NFL level, which is even better, and say, oh, I'm used to playing 30 snaps or whatever. And all of a sudden I got to play 60, 70, and I got to play 5 extra games. Well, it's Georgia's, so more like 4 or 5 extra games because the Eagles go to the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, he's got it's not.
Yeah, they also, by the way, they also have a month off in between their playoff game in college. I mean,
and it's not an insult but he and Jordan Davis have to get used to playing more.
Yeah, that's the biggest knock on Jordan Davis. He has to get into NFL conditioning because, I mean, he's a beastly guy. I remember when I met him at the Maxwell Awards, I'm like,
yeah,
you're bigger than you look on the TV screen, and you look big on the TV screen.
And yeah, he's one of the weirdest because he's been very effective for the Eagles in his role. But and you probably remember listening, I was concerned about that pick because and the word I always use, it's an esoteric pick, and people are going to expect things from the 13th overall pick. And he's not going to deliver those things, mainly sacks. But if he turns into Haloti Ngata, which is what the Eagles wanted him to, then it's a really good pick. And already, because I had Jalen up, I went to Jordan. So in 2022 as a rookie, he was the 26th best defensive tackle out of 127.
Pretty good.
Yeah, 2023 was 30th out of 130. He's a good player, really good player. Is he a great player? Probably not, but he's really good. And if the Eagles don't have him, their whole defense changes. Because when I talk about those, we go back to yesterday's show, those 5-man fronts, those tough and tight fronts, they don't have a backup. They're looking for one. They have been.
Yeah, and you talked about it a second ago, and you said, shoot, what's it? Javon Hargrave was playing the nose. That didn't work well.
And Marlon Tuipulotu would be the one to do it now, and he's okay, but he's 305 pounds. It's a big difference. It is a big, big difference. He'll be better at it than Javon was, but he won't be Jordan Davis. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, so the defense will change. John, let's get to I want to ask about the rookie draft pick, Quinyon Mitchell, because we talked a lot about coverages. We talked about the back end. We talked about the different things that they're doing in this defense. Do you think one of the biggest things they valued with Quinyon Mitchell, and he was very public about this pre-draft, was that he modeled his game after Darius Slay, which is obviously a zone type of corner that fits in this system. How much stock do you think they put in that? And would that tell you or tell me, whether Vic Fangio is here or not, they're married to this system?
Well, that's, part of the problem. I don't think you should ever be married to a system. And that unfortunately describes 90% of the coaches who are married to a system. I think you should try to take advantage of the players you have and their skill sets, which to me is common sense, but it's easier said than done.
Well, aren't they technically doing that? If Quinyon Mitchell is this type of corner that
Slay wasn't this type of corner till he got here. He was more.
And he got older.
He played. Yeah, he played a different style in Detroit. He was great. He's a great man coverage player. And now he's up to 6 Pro Bowls. So he's one of those guys who can play in anything either. And I think from Quinyon's perspective, it's more of, all right, he's really good, so I'm gonna model my
Yeah, I
game.
just wonder because, like we talked about, he was there. Terrion Arnold was there. You know, maybe they give the slight advantage to Quinyon because they're like, okay, he fits this scheme perfectly. Versus maybe Terrion
No, I
Arnold
just
doesn't.
think I actually think it's the opposite. I think they think he's got the higher ceiling as a
Okay.
player.
That's
and
good to
they're-
know. That's what I would like them.
Yeah.
That's what how I would like them to make the decision. But obviously, I don't know that.
Yeah, I just think they think he was better from a standpoint of from the scouting. And I've talked to the scouts enough to know that they, and this is probably better with Cooper. Like they're looking at him as an outside corner, but they also realize that, once he's out of their hands, it's up to the coaches to utilize him the way they want to utilize him. And that's where his versatility comes in. So, he played mostly outside corner at Iowa, so that's what they sort of evaluated him as. And if Vic gets a hold of him and says he could help us more, whether it's slot corner, safety, nickel linebacker, he'll use him in that way. So it's kind of a different type of mentality. But from now, Howie's got it both. Howie's got to think about that more than the scouts. The scouts are just evaluating players. And Howie's got to figure out what the coaches want and how it fits and all that kind of stuff. And that's the difficulty of that job. And it's a very difficult job. But yeah, I wouldn't get, and you've seen it now with coordinators. This has been a very successful team. And over the Nick Sirianni era, for the most part, made the playoffs every season, made a Super Bowl, NFC Championship, yada, yada, yada. And they've already gone through Shane Steichen, Nick himself, if we want to go back to that, Brian Johnson. And defensively, they've gone through Jonathan Gannon, Sean Desai, Matt Patricia. Here we are again. I wouldn't get caught up in drafting people for scheme. And I think the Eagles are pretty good with that.
We'll get to a commercial break soon. We have Kaden Steel from NJ.com coming up next. Last question, Johnny Mac, on the coverages and what we've talked about for really the last 2 days now. Let's assume Cooper DeJean is playing corner, either slot corner or outside corner, whatever one. We talked about big nickel where there's 3 safeties on the field. Do they have enough safeties on the roster? I mean, we got Sidney Brown, we got Reed Blankenship, you got CJ Gardner-Johnson. But if there's going to be packages where there's 3 safeties on the field, they're going to need more players at that position, or maybe one of the corners, one of the 14 corners they have, does move to safety.
Yeah, well, a lot of people keep thinking.
A lot of people want Justin Simmons. There's a couple
Yeah,
people in the chat
I
talking
don't-
about Justin
yeah.
Simmons. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's only 3 proven ones, so to speak. But if you want to consider Sidney proven, they did move Tristan McCullum there. They moved essentially, I think they're going to move Mekhi Gardner full time there. We'll see how it works out. And they have some bodies. But if you want an impactful player, I don't think that's coming because I think they like Reed Blankenship.
I think Cooper DeJean might make sense at safety.
Well, and he might, and he's versatile. And that's the thing. He can play there if you need him to play there. I can tell you they're starting him at outside corner. Doesn't mean he's finishing there. And
Right.
Vic explained that. You start somebody at their primary position, then you work in the secondary position. Now, for Cooper, that's already started, but it's outside corner is the primary position. Slot corner is the secondary. So they haven't gotten to safety yet. That doesn't mean they won't get to safety. Avonte Maddox, injuries demanded he play safety as a rookie. The Eagles didn't envision that or
Right.
work that.
Yeah, a lot of scenarios can happen that can
Yeah.
push things one way or the other.
Yeah. But he does have the versatility. I could just tell you they're not thinking about it yet. But there's a 90-man offseason roster. When things whittle down to 53, they can change pretty quickly.
Yeah, with the linebacking core though, I'm guessing after the last 2 days of conversation on defense, I'm guessing they're going to be running more big nickel than maybe we're thinking, solely based on the skill level.
Well, I've said that, but
linebacker.
that is pure speculation on my part because I don't like the linebacker.
Yeah, but it's fair speculation because the linebacking core sucks.
Well, on paper, it doesn't look good.
I mean, Nakobe Dean's done nothing. Devin White has had 4 straight years of pitiful linebacker play. I know everybody wants him to reach what he did his rookie year. The linebackers aren't good. I mean, I don't know. And you could be an Eagle homer for all I care. The linebacking core is not a good linebacking core by any metric.
If you were grading the league at linebacker, Eagles would be bottom 5. Easily.
Bottom 5.
Yeah.
So big nickel, I think, is going to come into play. So we'll see how it all plays out. Let's get to a commercial timeout. Coming up next, Kaden Steel, who's great on the draft, writes for NJ.com, does a lot of great work for them covering the Eagles. So we'll talk to him. We'll get his opinion on some of these things. Maybe talk to him about Cooper DeJean. Could he play safety? We will see how it all pans out. And let's get to a commercial timeout. Coming up next, Kaden Steel from NJ.com.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Field of life, First Trust Bank is there for you.
Champions on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Because Philadelphia dreams deserve a Philadelphia bank.
Heading down the shore. Have a ball once more.
Here, imaginations run wild and time stands still. Because here, you can find the best of the Jersey Shore, all on one 5-mile island. So leave the old you behind and get lost in the woods.
Wild, wild, wildwood days.
Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Hi, I'm Jim Muehlbronner, Managing Partner at Del Valle Insurance Group. Give us a call. We're a local, knowledgeable agency, not an 800 number. Go Birds!
The greatest fans on earth. It's a bold statement, but would you expect anything less from Philadelphia? 58 years of heartache creates a toughness, a grit, a resolve not found in most. Sure, our prayers were answered, but now that we've had a taste, we're looking for more. Pondley Hockey, official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles.
EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome back in, everybody. A Tuesday, May 14th edition of Birds 365, moving right along in the offseason, less than 1 week away from OTAs. We are joined now on Birds 365 by Kaden Steel of NJ.com. Kaden, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks, guys, for having me. Great to join.
Good to see you, Kaden. So we haven't talked to you since the draft. I guess we'll start there. Certainly looks good on paper. Where are you in the fact of optimism versus pessimism with Howie Roseman's draft?
Yeah, like you said, John, I mean, it's hard to grade right now because we don't know what's going to happen in the future with injuries and such. But, on paper, you never expected to play out the way it did, to be able to get Quinny Mitchell and Cooper DeJean with your top 2 picks, especially get Cooper DeJean at 40. Both players were considered top 25-ish prospects. I mean, Mitchell, top 15 prospect in this class, and be able to get both to help rebuild your secondary, I thought was, as good as it could have played out. And then for the rest of the draft, I mean, I thought they did a good job for the most part for getting value. I think Jalix Hunt is a really interesting draft pick. We don't know necessarily how you'll translate, how he'll translate from Houston Christian, but the athleticism profile, at the end of the 3rd round, I thought it was worth a swing, honestly. That's one where I think that maybe got the most amount of criticism, because, I mean, what is Houston Christian, right? Like, people don't really necessarily know, but I mean, every pick, in the 3rd, 4th, especially in the late 4th, 5th, 6th round, it's a swing. You're just taking shots, and why not take a shot on that athleticism profile? He doesn't need to play right away. And then, the rest of the draft, you're able to add to this offense, which I thought was interesting. You're able to get Will Shipley, who could be your, check down back. And it seems like they're going to prioritize, throwing the ball more to the running backs. You add Saquon in free agency, you add Will Shipley in the draft, who's more of a pass catching type of back. You add Anais Smith, who's a versatile playmaker, and he could do a lot of different things, including from the backfield as well as a wide receiver. So I thought it was interesting to see what maybe imprints that Kellen Moore might have. And then obviously Jeremiah Trotter Jr. was the fan favorite, and it'll be interesting because I heard Zander talking about it before the break. This linebacker group is not very good, and I'm not saying he's going to win a starting job, but who knows? Like, he might have the opportunity to. So I thought they had a good draft, but we'll look back in 2 or 3 years and see if it actually pans out.
Yeah, a lot of love for the 5th round picks this year. As you pointed out, Kaden, though, you're swinging in the 5th round. We don't know what these guys are going to be, but I mean,
there is tremendous.
Yeah.
All 3 of them. There are a lot of people think Anais Smith is going to be the slot receiver. Trott's going to be a starting linebacker, and even Trevor Keegan's going to push to be the starting right guard. Boy, that is optimism right there. I mean, these are 5th round picks. Now, there's a lot of dumb NFL teams, but there's a lot of teams passing over those guys until you get to the 5th round. There's flaws there. Are people too excited with those 5th round picks?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. Most 5th, 6th round picks, don't last more than 2 or 3 years in the league. You occasionally get your Puka Nakuas of the world and Kyron Williams, but that's a dime in a dozen. So yeah, probably pump the brakes a little bit on Jeremiah Trotter Jr. being a 5-time All-Pro and Anais Smith being an elite slot wide receiver. I mean, it would be great if these guys can become really good depth pieces for you and good special teams player, and perhaps in 2 years, one of the 3 might be a starter for you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That's more realistic. Yeah. I get it though. I mean, at this time of the year, for the NFL draft, it's an exciting time, especially if you're a fan, and it gives you new hope. But it's tough to adjust to the NFL, especially if you're a day 3 pick. So it's definitely smarter to pump the brakes, but you never know. There is day 3 draft picks you do tearing out. So
yeah, let's go to the top of the draft. You talked about Quinyon and Cooper DeJean. I mean, at one point before the draft, we were saying, okay, if we're picking at 21 or 22 and one of the 2 is there's a decision to make. We ended up with both of them in the top 40. What I'll ask you is, do we have enough? Has Howie done enough personnel-wise on the defensive side of the football to improve the defense? Does Vic Fangio have the guys he needs, or are we still missing a lot of talent on that side of the ball?
I think it's a start. It's a good step, especially with DeJean and Mitchell in the secondary. And there's going to be an adjustment period. So I'm not going to – maybe that's another – maybe people are overreacting. I don't think the secondary is going to come out next year and all of a sudden be all pro, all team. I think there's still going to be – it's tough to play defensive back as a rookie. So, as good as Quinny Mitchell and Cooper DeJean are, they might still struggle, a little bit next year. And you add that with, the way that James Bradbury struggled last year and – Slay getting older, and I know they added back, CJ Gardner-Johnson, but they're also going to have, Cindy Brown might not miss the beginning of the year. This secondary might still struggle, but I think it's a step in the right direction for the future. You have some young players that you could be excited about, and it seems like from that press conference Vic Fangio's talked about, he wants this to be his last job, so he might be here for 2, 3, 4 years. So I think it was the right step. And then overall, from a defensive perspective, with those additions, I do think they're still better than they were last year, but I'm not feeling great about the linebacker group. I mean, I still think Bryce Huff is a question mark of whether he could play a full-time role and replace the production that Hassan Reddick had. And it's no guarantee that this defensive unit's going to be any better. But, I mean, they've certainly have been trying in free agency in the draft, so we'll see how it plays out. But right now I would say, there's reason to feel optimism, but there's no, guarantee that the results will be too much better. Obviously, Vic is a really good defensive coordinator. He's been throughout his career. So you might be able to get more out of these guys than Matt Patricia and Sean Desai did. So I think more likely they're kind of in the middle of the pack next year instead of, bottom 3 defense. So I think it's more likely they're 18th or 17th next year.
Yeah, I think that's been my prediction already, Kaden. They will be better on defense because Vic is here, his presence. He's not a magic fix to everything, but they were so bad last year. That's part of it. They almost have to get better, and it's going to be taught better. It's not the Xerox copy. It's the original running the defense. I think all of that factors in to it being better. Now, I don't think it's going to be great because the talent's not there yet, but middle of the road, and they could win a lot of games with their offense if they can just get middle of the road defensively. And so not only Vic, Kellen Moore, your first impressions with those guys. We finally got to talk to them after they got hired 18 months ago, it seems, but we finally got to talk to them. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're both, seem, I thought Vic was really good, and just the way he outlined, his plan. And the one thing he talked about versatility, and that's the thing I'm most excited to see about this defense going forward. You mentioned getting the guy, and the way that Vic has used, his defense. He asks a lot of his guys, and
he does.
I think that's going to be the fun thing to watch, is to see how these players, adapt to these certain roles and where he uses them. So I thought he was great. And, I think, Vic, has a certain, reputation around the league for maybe being, grumpy or something along those lines. I mean, people have talked about it. He had some issues, obviously, in Miami, but, just for
old school. He's an old school guy.
School. Definitely, but from him just talking to us and the media, I mean, he seems like a fun guy to, he
is.
He's definitely got a personality that is enjoyable,
and he tells the truth, which I enjoy.
Yes,
and he doesn't give a what. I think that's the most impressive thing about him, is that, like Sean Desai, I think, like back in training camp, I remember, because I was one of them last year, Caden. I was like, you remember early he was throwing James Bradbury in the slot. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And Vic kind of explained it, because Sean's a direct disciple of Vic Fangio. And Vic said flat out, I like to throw a lot at them early and see what they can sort of ingest and then whittle it down from there, essentially. Paraphrasing, obviously. But he's got the cachet to do it. Like, nobody's going to second guess Vic Fangio. If he wants to throw James Bradbury in the slot, everybody's going to go, hey, good idea, Vic.
Yeah.
Where if Sean Desai does it without the reputation, without the experience, everybody goes, what are you doing? I think that alone tells you kind of the difference. And I think he's also smart. So if he realizes somebody can't handle something, he's not going to ask him to do it. I think the Eagles got a lot better at defensive coordinator.
Yeah. And I think you could say the same about, offensive coordinator. I get Kellen Moore didn't have the best season with the Chargers last year, but look, the offensive line was not very good. They lost Mike Williams at the beginning of the season, but when he was in Dallas, it just seems to me when he got fired, he was kind of the scapegoat for Mike McCarthy. A little, especially the way that, the last one of those I think it was the last press conference he talked to the team when they fired Kellen Moore. I think he's a really smart offensive mind. But the question is how much, control will he have? We still don't know for sure how much influence Sirianni will have versus Kellen Moore, and I'm curious just to see how his ideas are adapted. But he's a smart guy, and I think he'll bring different stuff to the offense. I know a lot of Eagles fans were complaining about motion and not using enough of that to kind of create mismatches. I do think if Kellen gets his hands on the offense and has a little more control than Nick, or at least Nick kind of listens to his ideas, he will have that. It will be something that's incorporated. He'll do different things. They're going to pass the ball to the running back. So, and even the draft picks, so like I said earlier, I think they indicate that. So it'll be fun to watch. He's a smart guy. We'll see if he can use all these pieces. This offense on paper has a chance to be better than last year. And it's nothing against DeAndre Swift, but Saquon Barkley is a different type of running back. He's more talented. He brings different things. I get Swift was productive, but then you also get A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, and you hope, Kellen Moore can even bring more out of them. You hope you get a healthy Dallas Goedert for the first time, for an entire season in a long time. But he has so many pieces to work with. This offense, Johnny, like you mentioned, it could be a top 3, 4, 5 offense in the league next year. And Kellen Moore has all the pieces. So I'm curious how it happens, and definitely think he has the mind and the right ideas to, make it come to fruition. So,
yeah, I want to kind of go ahead, Zander.
No, go ahead, Johnny Mac. You're good.
I want to sort of batten down on the motion aspect of it, because a lot of people had a problem with Nick Sirianni. I kind of look at it from like Nick, bottom of the league, they barely used it, and it all harkened back to his time with Phillip Rivers, who didn't like motion and was smart enough and savvy enough to play in 100 years to figure out things formationally. So he liked just, hey, let me figure it out, let me go to the line of scrimmage, I can figure it out. And I think Nick loves Phillip Rivers, for those who don't know. And I think he got caught up into that and saying, hey, when the quarterback changes, you got to change. And maybe Jalen needs a little bit more outliers to see some motion, to see what's going on, what the defense is in. So I think that's a problem from Nick's perspective. But then I asked Kellen the motion question, and Kellen went the opposite direction. It was like, well, my dad loved it. I grew up around it. I used a lot of it myself at Boise State. And I'm thinking, because I'm a weirdo, Kaden, I'm thinking, well, this is the same thing, just the opposite direction. He just likes it. And maybe Jalen Hurts, I don't know. Maybe he doesn't like it. So I think it's like, if we say one thing, we should also bring up the possibility of the other.
Yeah, that's fair. And there is a balance. I don't think, if you're Kellen Moore, you come in and all of a sudden you're running motion every single play. I mean, some teams, they run a lot of motion out of their offense, like the Rams and the 49ers. And necessarily the Eagles don't need to do that. They just need to incorporate it a little bit. But it is curious to see if there is, like, if it goes the polar opposite direction with Kellen Moore, like you said, John, the fact that he likes it a lot. Wonder if this offense completely changes. And it is interesting. I think you make a fair point of, just for, Jalen Hurts' sake and the offense's sake, it's just good to have that, because, I mean, at the end of the day, motion creates mismatches. It creates easier throws. And I think that's the one thing for me last year, just watching this offense, everything just seemed so difficult. There was nothing that was created that was just easy for Jalen. Everything was vertical down the field, and there just wasn't a ton of just easy stuff. And I think, adding that element to your offense, if it's just once in a while just to throw off a defense, will help. But it's a good point, John. It seemed like Sirianni didn't believe that motion wasn't necessary, but the rest of the league seemed like it was. And then Kellen, it seems like something that he'll bring in and try to add to the offense. But curious how much he doesn't, how much it helps Hurts, or maybe Hurts doesn't like him. I guess perhaps there is a chance that maybe he isn't comfortable. We don't know a lot of these things and how these players, like certain things. So that is definitely I kind of agree with you on that one.
Yeah, I'd love to see them make some throws easier for Jalen Hurts. Let's talk Jalen Hurts. Me and Johnny Mac have talked about the defense and the draft picks. I think the number one person that this season comes down on is Jalen Hurts. If he gets back to 2022 form, if he plays like an MVP candidate, I think this team legitimately has Super Bowl potential. But if he doesn't, I think they're and it's gonna be another disappointing season like it was last year. What does Jalen Hurts have to do to you to get the most out of this team and to get the most out of this high-powered offense?
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to see, and I think Jalen Hurts has been, pretty good, throughout his career so far. Obviously, we don't know, what level is he though? That's it's a fair point. Is he 2022? Is he last year? The first half of the season. I don't think he's the second half of the season. Jalen Hurts, that entire team struggled and played terrible and collapsed. Like obviously, you would have liked to see him play better, even though the circumstances around him were kind of it was a mess, the entire organization. You would like to see a guy who is an MVP candidate play better, but I don't think we'll see that version. But I think I'm more debating, is he, first half of last year, is he 2022, 2021? Is he more average, like top 12, top 15, or is he top 5? And I really don't know that yet. But the first thing I want to go back and see is just the decision making. Last year at the end of the year, that was the part I was most concerned about, how things were breaking down. Him taking a safety in that playoff game against the Buccaneers, stuff like that. Just, I know it might have been just, maybe he got in his head at the end of the year. The entire team was, kind of falling apart. But I just want to see the decision making return to, to be really good, like it was the year before. And then, overall, I mean, I do want to see him. I'm glad for the steps that he's taken as a pocket passer. I think he's a really good pocket passer. But I wanted to see the explosive, ability in Jalen Hurts to return. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what makes him great. Yeah, he is a really good pocket passer, but he could beat you with his legs on a consistent basis, and that's a threat that not a lot of teams have. You see it in Baltimore with Lamar Jackson. You see why Washington took Jaden Daniels probably over Drake May, because he adds the element. It's a nightmare for defensive coordinators to game plan. They struggled with it in 2022 with Jalen Hurts, but with the injury last year, with the knee that was reported, and he just never looked explosive. And we won't see that with our own eyes until about training camp or maybe in the regular season. But you got to hope that returns. And then as a passer, you hope he continues to develop and that he continues to get better, because he's not perfect. He misses some throws. He misses some reads still. And I think there's still a long way for him to go to be that consistent MVP level. But the talent is there. We've seen it in 2022 with Shane Steichen. You just have to hope that him and Kellen Moore mesh on that same page, because obviously the skill set's there. And you just have to hope that kind of they see eye to eye with each other. We don't know what was happening inside that building necessarily, but it definitely didn't seem like there was a lot of cohesion between him, Nick, and Brian Johnson. Obviously, Brian Johnson, is gone, but I just want to see Jalen just overall just play smart football, and just you hope that you can see some of that playmaking ability that you saw in 22, some of the off-script stuff, some of the athletic plays, and him also just developing the pocket still. Because Zander, you make a point. If he is an MVP candidate with the offensive weapons that they have, that means they're probably making a deep playoff run, even if he's not an MVP candidate. If he's just top 7, top 8, if he could just be, I mean, Eagles fans might not like me saying that. Even if he could just be Dak, if he could just be Dak level, I think this team could be a Super Bowl contender. So, and Dak was an MVP candidate last year. So,
yeah, I agree. Just a quick follow up: how much stock do you put in, or how negative is it that Jason Kelsey's going? We hear a lot of reports that Jason Kelsey was doing all the blitz pickups. That's something I'm going to be watching, because I think it matters more than people are talking about this summer. There's a lot of talk about a lot of things, and Jalen Hurts isn't involved. I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, I think it's a thing people might like to skip over, because you go back 2 years, they drafted Cam Jurgens, and he looked really good in preseason in 2022. And I was like, oh, wow. So people think he'll step in, it'll just be a natural transition. And the athleticism with Cam Jurgens definitely pops. But you mentioned just the IQ part of it. People have talked about Jason for years, where he's the heartbeat of that entire offense. And I think they'll miss that part. I mean, Cam might be able to make some of those athletic plays, but just the small integral things, that's what you would have to worry about. And then also for Cam, and he struggled at guard at times last year, and it's not his most natural position, but I mean, it's no guarantee that he's going to step in and the offense is going to function the same way. And that is a concern. Also, just I think the thing people forget the most is just the leadership aspect. I mean, Kelsey was a voice in that locker room for years, and we saw how things collapsed, at the end of last year. And I know every year is a new year, but things are kind of a little, murky right now. And I wonder, who's going to be that voice to step up without Kelsey. And I think that is an important, thing that to watch out for? Who's that offensive leader now? Is it AJ? You know, and it seems like he's going to continue to grow and mature. Is it going to be Jalen? And I think that's the part that intrigues me the most. Who's that voice in that offensive huddle going forward?
Yeah, and with Cam, I think my biggest question, I think Cam's going to be fine, but reality is he missed 5 games last year, or it might have been 6, with 2 different injuries. Jason Kelsey played every week for years and years, so durability is going to be a question mark as well. You mentioned explosive plays, and I'm going to throw another E word at you. Expectations with that offense. We all think it's got a potential. You mentioned it could be a top 5 offense. It should be a top. I'll go far as it should be a top 5 offense. But that's a lot of expectations.
Yeah.
And for Kellen Moore coming in, you mentioned Saquon a little bit. You got to get him involved. AJ's got to be involved. Devontae's got to be involved. Dallas Goedert's got to be involved. You got to keep everybody happy. It's a nice problem to have, as they say, but when you say that term, nice problem, the word problem is in it. It can be a problem to keep everybody happy. You concerned about the expectations overwhelming? Because I think it overwhelmed them last year. They were miserable. The most miserable 10-1 team was the quote in history.
Yeah.
Because they weren't getting style points.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the expectations on paper, I get it, but there is a world where this, you know, it's not as good, you know, as people think it might be. You mentioned even Cam Jurgens, but Tyler Steen, there's a chance that interior of the offensive line, we've seen before in this league throughout history, when there isn't good guard and center play in the middle, that interior defensive lineman can disrupt games. So that's, you know, there is question marks there. And then you mentioned it's at the end of the day, as smart as Kellen Moore is and as much success as he's had, this is his first year implementing, you know, his ideas into this offense. We've seen it for 3 years now, a new version, a new look on offense. I mean, last year was kind of similar. They just didn't adjust as much, but 3 new offensive coordinators and Steichen, Brian Johnson, now Kellen Moore. That's not a lot of continuity. As much as we want to be excited about Kellen, there's a chance that it does take maybe half a season if they're really overhauling things for this thing to get going. So I could see it in that perspective from them not finishing too high. And then there's a lot of mouths to feed. You gotta feed AJ, you gotta feed Devontae. They both just got paid, so maybe that helps a little bit. You know, they got a little money in the bank. You know, you're not
a little money.
Yeah, a lot of money now in the bank, so you don't have to worry about that. And maybe if they're, you know, that will help a little bit, and they're winning a lot more games, it won't be as, you know, much of a thing to worry about. And at the end of the day, you also mentioned Dallas Goedert. If there's one player I think they're not as worried about getting the ball to at this point, I mean, I think it's Dallas. I think they would love to incorporate him. I think him to be able to make plays in the middle of the field brings a different element. But I think this offense is going to run through AJ and Devontae and Saquon. I wouldn't be surprised if Saquon, if Kellen Moore kind of comes in and has done what he's done in the past, I wouldn't be surprised if Saquon has 50-plus catches next year. So that's a lot of people to throw the ball to. Curious to see how much, you know, they throw the ball this year. I think they'll throw it a decent bit, and how many, you know, run the ball chance will start about, you know, week 10 this year, because I think Kellen wants to, I think he wants to be high fly. Like,
he definitely wants to be high fly. 11 personnel, he's throwing it all over the place. That's my prediction. With Kellen Moore, unfortunately, for some Eagles fans. Not the smart ones. That's how you win in the modern NFL. Then you run to close it out. You pass to get the lead, you run to close it out.
Kaden, let me ask you, who do you think has the most pressure on going into on the offensive side of the ball this year? I mean, they have all this talent. They signed Saquon Barkley. They really had an underwhelming performance at the end of last season. Is it Nick? Is it Kellen? Is it Jalen? Where's the pressure lie?
Just to be different, like, because we've already talked about Jalen. Overall, it's probably Jalen, but just from a different perspective, there is some pressure on Saquon to come in here. The reason you don't usually see Howie, you know, go out and sign running backs for that type of money, and I think in their minds, he's going to come in, he's going to elevate the offense like Swift couldn't, like Miles Sanders couldn't. And from what we saw last of Saquon in New York, and I get it, the offensive line was horrendous. The team's not good. Daniel Jones is not good. I still believe Saquon is a supremely talented running back, but there's no guarantee that he comes in here and he's way more productive than DeAndre Swift was. And if that's the idea that he's going to be the person that they looked at it and they're like, it's more than just play calling. We need that missing piece to kind of push us back up into that top 3 to 5 territory. There will be, some pressure on Saquon to be the player that, frankly, even though he's been really good in his career, I don't think he's ever fully lived up to his potential. We've seen moments, and it's whether does he put it all together in Philly. And I think that is a lot of pressure for him to, even though the contract in reality isn't too terrible, but like he's got to be a top, 5 to 6 back to make it seem worth it to me.
I think the Eagles better press the pause button on the hype machine there, because you got Howie calling them special. You got Kellen Moore calling them impactful. I mean, just see how it works out. Yeah, I think they're putting, and their whole sentiment of this guy's different. This guy's, essentially the best thing, closest thing to Christian McCaffrey. They're putting a lot of pressure on that guy. A lot of pressure. To live up to that. So I agree with you there. I've been talking about that for a while. At Kaden_Steel 19. Make sure you follow Kaden on X. You can read him at nj.com. Our buddies Bob Brookover, big Saquon Barkley fan. He's contributing to the hype as well. Kaden.
Yeah, he is.
Chris Franklin, also good friend of the show. Good to see you, Kaden. And I guess we'll end it on one defensive question. Who was the slot corner in Kaden Steele's mind?
God, there's so many different options, which is different than last year, right? With all the injuries happened, you were kind of throwing Eli Ricks in the slot, and I don't think they'll have that problem this year. I don't even know if Eli Ricks will make the roster with how much depth that they've added at corner this year.
Yeah.
So that speaks to the amount of options, and that is the one area. Whether you want to make an argument whether the top in talent's going to show out this year or not, we'll see. But the depth is certainly better. And I mean, you brought back Avonte Maddox, but I'm not really confident. We saw him. It's just so many injuries in the past few years. He came back and played safety in that playoff game, and it didn't look that great. You got him back on the veteran minimum. So I'm not going to pick Avonte, even though he's been that guy, since 2018. I know they've said this. They've started, to talk about how they're going to, put Cooper outside cornerback at first. But I think maybe it's not week 1, but I think by week 3, 4, 5, Cooper, I think they're going to play him on the outside a little bit, move him around, maybe even at safety. But I think eventually he settles into that nickel quarterback role about, week 5, week 6, and he becomes that guy there that can play nickel. And then he can also move over to safety, and you have other then maybe you can move Avonte in there as your backup slot or whoever else you want to throw out there. But, the idea that, for me right now, I think Slay and I know people are talking about Bradbury still being here, but there's no way in my mind that Quentin
Can't
Mitchell.
see it.
Yeah,
I
can't see it. I think Quentin Mitchell starts. And you took Cooper DeJean in the second round, and you traded up to get him. They wanted him. They loved him. You heard Jeffrey Lurie on there and Howie Roseman talking about they were obsessed with getting him. Howie couldn't sleep. There's no way in my mind that he doesn't have a role in this defense. And the easiest path right now, in my opinion, is nickel cornerback, because you already have CJ at safety. You have Reed Blankenship. You'll have Sidney Brown. I think Cooper's a nickel, and he's a really good player at nickel. I'm not saying he is this player, but we've seen what Trent McDuffie means to the Chiefs as their slot corner. I'm not saying he's going to be that level of player, but it could be a guy who's one of the top nickels in football, and I think he takes over pretty fast.
Good stuff, Kaden Steel. Thanks so much for joining the show. Make sure everybody reads Kaden Steele's work at nj.com and follows Kaden on Twitter. Kaden, thanks for joining the show, man.
Thank you.
There's Kaden Steel from nj.com. Great stuff. Great talking to Kaden. Really, really knowledgeable about the team. So pretty good stuff there. Johnny Mac, it's been a defensive 2 days to start the week. We got to talk some offense tomorrow.
Got to get back to the headline, the sexy stuff, the offense. Yeah.
Well, look, the NFL is dictating that we should talk about offense, right?
Yeah. I mean, everything in this league is built around the offense and trying to get more scoring and get points up, and people are excited by it. And this is one of the top offenses in football talent-wise, but that doesn't mean there isn't question marks. We got into a few of them. We'll get into them a little bit more tomorrow, but I've said it pretty consistently. To me, the most interesting story about this team this year will be how Nick Sirianni and Kellen Moore mesh together, or if they mesh together. It's going to be the top story of the year.
We'll come back and we'll wrap up this Tuesday edition of Birds 365. I got one question for Johnny Mack before we get out of here today, and it has to do with the pressure on the offense. Somebody in the chat told me clearly hurts, and I disagree in a big way, and I'll tell you why after the break when we close up this Tuesday edition of Birds 365. Make sure everybody likes the show. Just almost out of time here on Tuesday, so we'll have a quick follow-up with Johnny Mack on that. Make sure you like the show. Stay tuned for my final question to Johnny Mack on this Tuesday edition of Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Is the best vacation one that you find, or one you get lost in? One that takes you to new heights, or reminds you to go with the flow? To get your feet wet and your wheels spinning? One that lets you find your own rhythm, or get carried away? Find the best of yourself. Get lost in the woods. Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Go passionately. Go fearlessly. Go confidently.
Go Birds!
Go confidently towards your goals with First Trust, Philly's hometown bank for nearly 90 years, and the official bank of the Philadelphia Eagles. We're focused on getting you over the goal line. So go with conviction. Go with trust.
Go Birds!
And go forward with us by your side. First Trust Bank, the official bank of Philadelphia dreams. Oh, and go Birds.
Listen, if we even think you owe us money, you won't know what hit you. We'll put liens on everything you own. Raid your bank accounts, retirement fund, pension. You'll open up your paycheck and cry because we'll already have the money. We'll haul you into federal court and you might even go to jail. Hey, it's our job.
Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. Our experts will fight for you using IRS guidelines to stop any IRS actions like bank levies or wage garnishments. Plus, eliminate penalties and interest and reduce your past tax bill so you pay the IRS less. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a tax doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
I'd have my mom call the number on the screen. You come see me alone. We'll work it out.
EAGLES, Eagles.
Wrapping up a Tuesday edition of Birds 365. I got one question left for Johnny Mack. Sorry, I got the guys doing the lawn out back. So I don't know if there's any noise coming through from that. I apologize. But Johnny Mack, real quick, where does the pressure lie going into the season on the offensive side of the football? Slager tells me it's all Jalen. And I don't think it's Jalen because Jalen's not going to get scapegoated no matter what happens this year. He's got a $100 million cap hit. They're not moving on from Jalen Hurts. Now, Nick Sirianni and Kellen Moore, on the other hand, I don't think the same is with them. Where do you think the pressure lies?
Well, the pressure, if you're bringing the coaches into the equation, I think, Nick Sirianni, he's, whether you want to use the term lame duck or not, I mean, the perception around the league, and you'll see it with all the betting odds and things like that, is Nick is on the hot seat. And I describe it as the clock has started on Nick Sirianni. So if that's your definition of, yeah, Jalen Hurts is going to be here, I don't know if Nick Sirianni is going to be here. But I mean, and I always say this about the quarterback, and you know, when people do those top 25 lists, I always do top 25 best pure football players in the offseason. And the reason I do that, there's some other people that do most impactful. It's always the quarterback. Always. Whether you have a good quarterback or the worst quarterback in the NFL, he's the most impactful. So to me, the answer is always the quarterback on the field because that's the most important position, arguably in sports, never mind the NFL. And it's always the quarterback from that perspective. But yeah, Nick is, the clock has started. I always say there's levels, and he's at the standpoint where they scapegoated people last year. And now once you do that, the clock starts on the head coach.
Exactly. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow. We had a great defensive deep dive the last 2 days. Yesterday was part 1. If you guys missed that, I encourage you to go and watch it on our YouTube channel. It's up over 8,000 views, tremendous feedback. Johnny Mac really breaks down this Vic Fangio defense. And then for anybody that checked in late today, we got into part 2 where we talked a little bit more about the back end, the coverages, Jalen Carter we got into. So really good stuff on the defense. That will be posted up later on the JAKIB Sports channel today. So really good stuff from Johnny Mac, getting into the weeds of the defense and football and all of that, which is really good to listen to, really good to learn from. For anybody that as a football honk, that's the segment for you. So thanks everybody for tuning in today. Great show as always. We'll be back in the morning on Birds 365 at 8 a.m. Johnny Mac, good show today. I'll catch you tomorrow, sir.
All right, sounds good. Thanks guys.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Don't forget to hit the like on your way out, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Birds 365, the destination for the passionate Eagles football fan who bleeds green. If it's Eagles football, we're talking about it. Debate inside the locker room and guests that are some of the greatest football minds from around the region. We hope you enjoyed the show. We know we had a blast. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on social media at JAKIB Sports. See you next time on Birds 365.